are now tuned in to the only live radio show dedicated to Wisconsin athletics and presented by fans for fans. That's right, it's MadtownBadgers.com presenting the world-famous Badgers Power Hour. For the next hour, we've got your best and most in-depth look at all things Bucky right here on BPH. Don't forget, if you want to interact with the show, hit us up on Twitter at MTBadgers and like our Facebook page. As always, our phone lines are open, so hit us up at 714-242-5166. Now here to bring you all the action, live from our top-secret Madtown Badgers studios, it's your host and MadtownBadgers.com managing editor, Andy Coppins. So sit back, relax, grab your favorite beverage, as it's time to talk some hockey.
What's going on, folks? Andy Coppins, managing editor over here at MadtownBadgers.com, here with you after our 3-week hangover. That's right, folks. It took us that long. Nate, you were there for our anniversary edition. I don't know about you, but Hangover City, no, not really, folks. Couldn't be 3 weeks there, but 3-week break for us, and we're back here. Lots and lots to talk about. So let me go ahead and start by introducing our co-host here. In the center stage, that's Armand Belding, our football analyst and columnist extraordinaire. Armand, what's going on?
Not much, man. It's been a very busy 48 hours or maybe 72 hours if we want to include the Everett Golson news in the world of college football. So anything but sleepy in the off-season. A lot of exciting stuff to talk about, and can't wait to get to it.
No doubt about it, and always alongside with us here on YouTube and also via Blog Talk Radio, which will be available via podcast later. That's Nate Wolfel, our hockey expert and featured columnist here at Madtown Badgers. Nate, what's going on with you? I know it's summertime, and you're now an official member of the real world.
I am, and it's a pleasure to be a part of that club, to finally join that elite company for sure, and awesome to be talking Badgers as always, man.
All right, well, we've got a lot to get to, obviously. The biggest thing first, before we get into what's going on the show, Twitter and Facebook, make sure you check us out. Our handle right underneath me, at MTBadgers. Make sure you're using the hashtag BPHLive. That's what we're going to go with from here on out to kind of differentiate us from the talk of a not-so-wonderful disease that's out there. So we're going to differentiate ourselves. BPH Live is the hashtag you need to use. Facebook.com/MadtownBadgers. And, of course, don't forget, if you're watching via YouTube and you don't want to miss anything that's going on here or via the Sports Intelligentsia Network, just make sure you check us out and hit subscribe. It should be right below this video. It's youtube.com/TheSintelligentsia. So make sure you check that out. Well, folks, we've got a lot coming up on tap. And, Armand, why don't you let everybody in on a few of the topics we'll be discussing tonight?
Absolutely. Well, we're going to be covering the latest in recruiting news. A lot of breaking information, actually, in the past few minutes for Wisconsin football. Also going to be comparing this season in terms of multiple sports, multiple athletic teams from Wisconsin, how they've fared, why they've been so dominant across the board with previous seasons, and saying which year is the best. I mean, this is really an exciting time to be a Badgers fan, even though football had a little bit of a down year, if you call the Rose Bowl a down year. But so many other sports just off the charts performance. It's going to be a really great show.
Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to that. And, of course, we're going to be talking about everything that's going on in the world of college football, and not just college football, college athletics in general. It's a strange time. Weird news dump over the past 72 hours, like you said, Armand, and we'll be talking about that. But first things first here, Armand, you're the recruiting guy. You know this stuff inside out. Obviously we followed it as well. First things first, obviously the big thing since we last talked on Badgers Power Hour, 2 commitments for the class of 2014, and Billy Hirschfeld out of Heartland, Wisconsin, Arrowhead High School. And why don't you let us know a little bit about him and the second commitment here, and going forward, what are your thoughts? I mean, the impact of these 2 commitments on this class.
Absolutely. So the first one is Billy Hirschfeld. He's the 5th of the Super 6 in-state Wisconsin players that the coaches targeted, specifically Ben Strickland and Gary Anderson, wanted to make sure they kept up the wall around the state of Wisconsin. Billy Hirschfeld is an outstanding player. He's a strong side defensive end. He's coming in around 6'6". He's close to 300. He's around 270 or 280, I believe. The thing about Billy is that he's a multi-player. He can do a lot of different positions on the football field. Right now, they have him coming in as a defensive end, but he's got really long arms. He's very big upper body that they can build up. He might even be an offensive tackle prospect, and we know that offensive line is a very thin position right now, and the coaches are looking at maybe potential ways to shore that up, bringing in as many as 5 or 6 offensive linemen in this class alone. And even though Billy's coming in at the defensive end position, he may end up switching before it's all said and done. The other recruit that we got last week, this was really exciting news. I'm going to make sure I pronounce this as correctly as possible. Ula Tolatau, but that could be totally wrong.
No, you are dead on. It's Tolatau.
Tolatau is a Polynesian player coming out of Utah. Salt Lake City, obviously, Coach Gary Anderson tapping his old roots on that one. Not as highly rated as some of the other recruits that we've gotten so far. He's actually the lowest according to every recruiting site that we've got access to. He's averaging 2 stars across the board. By the way, I should point out Billy Hirschfeld, mostly a 3-star recruit, although he is a 4-star according to 24/7 Sports. Ula is coming in as a fullback. He plays running back right now in high school, kind of a wing T offensive system. Really hard runner, big guy. He's 230. He's 6'1". He's a bruiser. Really runs guys over. But the feeling that I get is that they're getting him not so much as a running back, fullback, but more as an athlete, and also as a Polynesian guy. And the coaches really like the Polynesian players, mostly because of their work-like attitude, hardworking. They're very family-oriented, so they're very close-knit, and they have strong fiber of their person. I mean, they're very just root, hardworking, salt-of-the-earth type people. And these coaches have a lot of experience with Polynesian players from their previous schools, and they know that fits in with the Wisconsin model. So bringing Ula in is kind of a thing to be able to recruit to other players, saying, hey, we already have one. Why don't you talk to him and find out how excited he is about coming out to Wisconsin and building those connections, specifically on the West Coast. And as we all know, there have been, over the years, numerous Polynesian players making it all the way to the NFL, outstanding character guys. And Ula, well, maybe not so much in Notre Dame's case with the invisible girlfriends, but other than that, you're dealing with a high success rate of players on the field. I have a cat attacking me at the moment. Very high character guys, and I think Ula's a really great fit. The only question mark is that I think he's going on a mission because he's a Mormon, so he's going to go on a 4-year mission trip, or 2-year, excuse me, so we might not see him until 2016. I don't know if that means he counts as a 2016 recruit or a 2013 recruit. I'm a little bit hazy on that one. But in any case, it's a good commit. And we have other breaking news today, and including the past few minutes, which I just found out about. For anyone who's been following Badger recruiting this year, quarterback has been a big issue. We had Tanner McAvoy come in, but he's JUCO, junior college transfer. He only has 3 years of eligibility left, and we're looking to bring in a quarterback who can do the full 4 years, maybe 5, including a red shirt. Kyle Allen, by some experts, the #1 pro-style quarterback in the entire country, who Wisconsin's been on for months now. They even emailed him or sent him, I think, 53 handwritten letters a few months ago. Kyle Allen announced his top 5 today. It did not include the University of Wisconsin, which is kind of a surprise to some of us. I mean, most people, I think, didn't think they would make it. But it's a little bit of a surprise considering that he had a really great visit a few weeks ago at the beginning of May. And I think the coaches were really invested in Kyle. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. But onward and upward. Unfortunately, again, another player who is expected to be at the top of their list. I got to make sure I pronounce this one correctly as well. Kaiser. Oh shoot.
Sean Kaiser.
Sean Kaiser. Thank you very much. Couldn't find it. By everyone's estimate, a top 10 dual threat quarterback in the country out of Ohio. Evidently has left the Badgers off his top 4 list, even though everybody was saying that I was seeing that he was really interested in Wisconsin, was going to take a visit and all that. Apparently it's not worked out. So now we're turning our attention to a couple other players. It's been a very kind of sad past 24 hours, but for Badger fans, and myself included, seeing how this coaching regime is going about their recruiting, I mean, they're just putting out offers all over the place, something like 30 offers or something in the state of Georgia. It's just been really impressive and very aggressive, especially when compared to Brett Bielema's recruiting strategies. Hasn't borne as much fruit.
You committed the party foul.
I'm not going to talk about Bert. I'm not talking about Bert, but it is worthwhile making a little bit of a comparison because they did operate in different ways, or they do operate in different ways. But I can say it's been a little bit disappointing not getting in on these top recruits, but getting Billy and Ula has been a nice surprise during the offseason, which is usually a pretty quiet period.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, seeing those two come on board. And then also, you hit on the Kyle Allen situation. That one I was a little surprised in because of, like you said, his visit and the fact that Wisconsin has been one of the first, I would say, group of people that have been on him. And Kyle Allen also knows Coach Anderson from his days at Utah State and everything that was going on there. So I think that one's a little more disappointing than maybe the Deshaun Kaiser situation, just for the simple fact that that's a newer offer for the Badgers. But it'll be interesting to see where they move on. There's a lot of talk about DJ Gillen being the next guy to come on board. But I'm really, you hit the nail on the head as far as the aggressive nature of Wisconsin. And it was really interesting to see they already have 27 offers at last count last week. When I did the last count, they have 27. I think it's up to 29 now. Almost 30 offers in total out to the class of 2015 already. That's a complete departure, and we've talked about this with Evan on our anniversary edition. And Evan has also made the note that the aggressive nature is possibly more about building the reputation of Wisconsin than it actually is an indication of their overall style. He said, this is a brand new staff, brand new people. They need to introduce themselves into new areas and new groups of people. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch here. And Nate, I wanted to get your thoughts here on where this is all going in terms of the recruiting and who you're really watching for over the summer and what trends you're watching for.
I guess the first thing, Andy, and Armand brought up the quarterback situation, Kyle Allen, as you discussed a little bit too. I think maybe, I hate to say this because any Badger fan obviously wants the best for their team, and knew Kyle Allen was worth the effort, or would have been worth the effort had they landed him. But it's both sides of the coin that both of you just discussed. One is that you're encouraged. A Badger fan has to be encouraged by seeing the amount of offers out there and the amount of aggression that Gary Anderson and his staff has shown early on. And part of it, I think, might be the nature of the college football coaching carousel. Is that you might not even get a full 4 years to get your foot in the door, especially at a major university like Wisconsin. You got to show that you have a long-term vision, even if you haven't coached a meaningful game or a game at all yet, in Gary Anderson's case. You have to show that your dedication and the expectations you have of your recruits stretches beyond just the immediate future, even if you don't get that long-term timetable really to make it happen. You have to show almost immediately, I think, in this day and age in college football, that you're looking ahead and you're serious about making a name for yourself at a big institution like Wisconsin or attracting major recruits. But on the other side, I think the whole Kyle Allen situation is kind of intriguing to me. I think it might force Badger fans down from the high of landing Tanner McAvoy, is that while Wisconsin at the quarterback position, I think when it comes to attracting top-level recruits, is a lot further along than they used to be, they're still not all the way there. And that's not anyone's fault in particular, but it's going to take time to really sell the position of quarterback at Wisconsin, in my opinion. Russell Wilson did wonders, as I've said many times in this program, for possibly opening the door or at least giving those higher caliber prospects at the quarterback position a little more to chew on when it comes to possibly playing in Madison than there used to be. But it's going to take more than Russell Wilson to consistently land guys like that. And it's nothing against the program. It's nothing against the coaching staff. It's just that Wisconsin's reputation precedes it on the recruiting trail when it comes to playing quarterback, that this is still going to be a very run-heavy offense would be my estimation of what we've learned here. It'll be a different one style-wise. There will definitely be some nuances that are completely different than what we're used to. But all in all, it's still going to be Wisconsin football on the offensive side of the football. To answer your other question, Andy, in terms of trends I'm looking for continued aggression. We've all touched on it already, 10 minutes into the show, that it's something that has struck us very early on in Gary Anderson's tenure, that he means business. He's going to go after the top-level guys. He might not land all of them, but he thinks and truly believes he works at a place where he can get a few top-level guys, and he's going to keep pursuing them relentlessly. how does it work out now that we've had a few guys, not elite guys, but some definitely higher end prospects leave Wisconsin off of their top 4 list, their top 5 list. How do Anderson and his staff address that? How do they change their approaches, or do they remain steadfast and loyal to the approach that they had already set? I think those are the trends I'm looking for. I'm looking for Anderson and his staff to continue to be aggressive, even in the light of adversity when not everything goes their way. It's part of the game. I think any coach would tell you that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nate, as far as that's concerned. The other big trends I'm looking for is what happens in Armand. You hit on this up front, is the offensive line. It's got to be a concern. Depth, at least, has to be a concern. And it was going to be because of how many players have left. And then with Frederick leaving early, that kind of left Wisconsin in a little bit of a lurch. But, you got to watch where that's going to go, and I think there are some very intriguing prospects and some guys out of the state of Ohio that could be very big names to watch in terms of commitments over the next, I would say, month or so on the offensive line side of things. And the other big one in our mind, we haven't even mentioned this yet, and Nate as well, wide receiver. It has to be a position that needs to be addressed here at some point. They've got to land at least a 3-star, high 3-star, low 4-star type of guy. They've got to get a few of these guys in this class, and I think it's interesting to see where a guy like Jermaine Elmuner and some of the other guys on the offensive line are going to go. And I mean, there's some very intriguing wide receiver prospects as well. But we'll save that kind of context for hopefully having Evan on our program again next week here on Badgers Power Hour. But moving forward here and still tying this into recruiting, I wanted to get your thoughts here because this has been an ongoing subject for quite some time, and it also ties into a few other things that we're going to talk about here on Badgers Power Hour. And I'll throw this to Nate first. And it's Bert Bielema's comments today, SEC Media Day. He took a bite of the Big Ten versus SEC apple, and it's just. And I wrote about this on the website. I just find it completely ironic and not ironic. Ironic's the wrong word. I find it completely asinine and stupid that he keeps doing this. He put his foot in his mouth to begin with when he talked about the Big Ten not wanting to be like the SEC in any way, shape, or form. But then today he comes out and says, well, it was all about jealousy in the Big Ten wanting to be like the SEC. Well, which one is it? Because they're completely different. It's you can't have it both ways. So basically you're saying either the Big Ten doesn't want to be successful or the SEC is successful because of what? It doesn't make any sense to me how he went about this. And if realistically, I think Bielema, of all of these people that took this bite of the apple today, should have been the one that shut up the most, and he chose to talk the most.
I think, Andy, what it tells me is that Brett's very cognizant of who signs his paychecks. I think that's like one thing you can take away from this is that the comments you made, I think it comes to the shock of the comments you referred to, I should say, it comes to the shock of no one that when he talked about the Big Ten not wanting to be like the SEC, his current employer was UW, and when he talks or made the comments he made today, that seemed to be a little more pro-SEC in terms of the Big Ten jealousy, and along those lines came when Arkansas was his employer. I think that's playing the field a little bit, but as you alluded to, Andy, I think you bring up an intriguing point that why take the bite of the apple at all? You don't have to. I don't think you have to. Certainly, you're going to face those questions. That's natural. What's the one? It's a narrative that's played out over the past several years, the whole Big Ten versus SEC thing. And look, a Big Ten guy comes to SEC country. Of course he's going to get these questions. There's no mystery that was going to happen today. But the fact that Brett chose to go ahead and comment on it, it's a bold play on his part for a guy who in my opinion, didn't have to make that move. I don't think he necessarily. I think one thing that and I don't mean to be Homer here, but one thing Brett's going to have to look out for in his first year at Arkansas is writing checks his team can't cash, especially initially. The adjustment period, I think there's going to definitely be one, especially in a conference of the quality conference like the SEC. So that's first and foremost. But I think going back to his comments he made earlier that you were referring to, I'm not sure that that's anything that his team has to live up to or deal with, but I think it's a very slippery slope. You start making comments like the comments he made today, and all of a sudden it's comments about how he has more to work. It could lead itself. I'm not saying he's made such statements. It could lead himself to all of a sudden I have more to work with at Arkansas than I ever had at Wisconsin. The talent pool is so much deeper here, and all these comments that all of a sudden, if your team's not producing, seem more and more foolish as your team, if they would continue to come up empty, continues to do so. He inherited a program that's a mess. That there's talent there. I don't mean to completely shut down Arkansas. It's not a low-level job by any stretch of the imagination, but he didn't inherit Alabama either. So you have to be careful with the statements you go ahead and make, and I don't have any particular problem, I guess, it's, like I said, especially knowing who writes his paychecks, with the comments he made today, but it's what these comments could lead to that I think is what we need to pay attention to moving forward.
Yeah, and Armand, I guess, for me, I agree with what Nate had to say there. I just find it, interesting that he's kind of played both sides of this angle. So, it lends you to wonder which side he actually comes down on. And I get that he's, in SEC territory, but there's a way to handle these questions. He's been around the media block how many times, and Nate and I both know he is adept at dodging questions and finding his own way to answer, a seemingly benign question. He had to have known these were coming. And then second of all, I guess, Armand, the broader picture is, for me, he had to know this was coming because it seems to be a narrative that the media has had over the past, I would say, 5 or 6 years, that it's always Big Ten versus SEC. And in reality, for me, over the past 3 years especially, it's more, in my mind, it should be more of a comparison and a contrast between the Big 12 and the SEC for, dominance. Let's face it, the Big Ten has not been a dominant conference, I would say, at least for 3, if not 4 seasons. It has not been one of the top 2 or 3 conferences. You could also make an argument for the Pac-12 jumping up there. For me, I guess, there's a way around this for him, and I find it interesting that he continues to further this narrative, with whether it's with Badger fans, whether it's with the Big Ten in general. Just let it go, let it die, and move forward. That's the way that he should have handled it for me. What are your thoughts?
That's not in his nature. He doesn't really let things go. Brett tends to kind of bring them up, not letting kicks the dead horse to a certain extent. But he's also a master of the media, not only in terms of dodging questions and kind of saying things that are just for PR purposes, but he's also good at getting attention to his program. And when he was our coach, we appreciated that. I mean, he was on ESPN on a regular basis. He was on their ESPN radio programs, multiple programs. He was on SportsCenter. He would go all the way to Bristol to do a TV day where he would do multiple shows in a day. He marketed the hell out of Russell Wilson when he was here. He's a very good salesman in terms of, and he knows the value of the press and getting his team, just even the name Arkansas as much as possible, even if it's for something silly and a little bit contentious like what we're talking. We're doing it right now. We're fueling it right now by even talking about it. And I don't really particularly care. I know that that's his goal, and I know that he doesn't have any particular bad blood, I don't think, with the Big Ten or with Wisconsin necessarily. Maybe a little bit, but this is mostly designed to bring attention to himself and to the Arkansas program in general. Whether or not he can, put his money where his mouth is on the field, like saying that we're going to beat Alabama and we're going to, I'm going to give you something you've never had, an SEC championship and stuff like that, that remains to be seen. But right now it's the off season. He has to maintain hype and and sell tickets. So that's what it really boils down to. And I could, to be honest with you, care less.
Yeah, and I totally understand that. That's not where I was necessarily going. It's just more of the fact that I find it kind of funny more than anything else that he continues to take, like I said, take that bite of the apple. But transitioning into that, let's go ahead and talk about some of the other big things here in our segment from our sister site, the B1GTime.com, and we're going to As the B1G Turns.
It's now time for As the B1G Turns.
All right, folks, As the B1G Turns. And we got a lot of topics that we've already talked about, and both of them have some merit in what we're going to be talking about here. First things first, I think one of the more interesting things that has happened is the commitment of Jabril Peppers, a 5-star athlete going to Michigan, vaulting Michigan to the number 1 spot and at least into the top 5 in most, if not all, of the rankings. Whether it's ESPN or Rivals or Scout, and I think they're number 1 on the 24/7 Sports rankings. I haven't checked that yet today, but yeah, I think that's interesting. And the other part of this is, there was a lot of talk, and Urban Meyer mentioned this about the Big Ten stepping up its recruitment game. And I think you're seeing it already playing out in 2014. There are 5 schools inside the Scout and Rivals top 25. 247 Sports, I believe, has 4 of them in the top 25, with Wisconsin and Michigan State inside the top 30. So by when things are all said and done, we could end up with over half of our teams inside the top 25 from the conference. Now, is that SEC territory where you get 4 or 5 inside the top 10 or the top 15? Not necessarily, but I think it's a great start and a great indication of where things are to come. Armand, what is your big takeaway as far as, people were worried about maybe Ohio State and Michigan State kind of just running away with recruitment and nobody else kind of playing along. And it seems like that's not necessarily the case in 2014 at least.
Absolutely. I mean, the past 2 recruiting cycles, well, I should say this one and last year, Big Ten has made huge strides, specifically Michigan and Northwestern. Northwestern is killing it right now. They have a top-flight quarterback coming in for this coming season. They already have one for 2014. Pat Fitzgerald is growing a phenomenal program over there. They were already dangerous to us. I remember, I can't even recall all the names of the different quarterbacks, but I felt like they had a different one every time we played them, and they always were a tough win. I don't think we've won in Evanston since the 90s. They never win when they come to us, but it's this one of those weird things where they just can't get over that hump, kind of like Ohio State and Purdue, which Ohio State randomly gets upset by Purdue all the time. It doesn't make sense. But now Pat Fitzgerald is making a serious program in Evanston. I'm a little bit jealous. Their recruiting's been excellent. Michigan has been outstanding. Like you said, number 1 class in the country right now. Urban Meyer is trying to pick up the pace, but he's doing really, really well. Illinois coaches are trying to put together some good players, even though they've been absolutely atrocious the last couple seasons. And Ron Zook, who's renowned as being a nationally powerful recruiter, no longer at the program. Purdue not doing that great. Iowa struggling. Minnesota struggling. But Michigan State doing really well. Wisconsin, not off to a bad start, like you said, top 30 program. So whether or not it's going to compete with the SEC remains to be seen. I think people focus maybe a little bit too much on the recruiting aspect of why programs are dominant. If you look at Southern California last year, SC, terrible team. They had the number 1 recruited quarterback. They had 2 or 3 number 1 wide receivers. They had a former top 10 running back. Their offensive line is always, across the board, top flight recruits, and they were just, dog vomit for a lot of the season last year, despite being a preseason number 1. So it's not just about recruiting, but it does have a strong impact, and I think the Big Ten's off to a really good start.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Nate, I wanted to bring to your attention and ask you about this situation too. Your feelings on, and I said this over at the b1gtime.com, I don't necessarily take a whole boatload of stock in individual player rankings. It could be the number 1 overall player. Let's Darrell Green, what's his last name, from Missouri. He comes out as the number 1 wide receiver, number 1 overall prospect in the nation. And if that's the case, especially at a school like Missouri and at a position like wide receiver, you should be able to come in and at least be a somewhat dominant or somewhat noticeable force. And he was nothing last season. Now, does that mean he's not going to be anything? No. But the point is that, recruits and individual rankings, stars and all that stuff doesn't necessarily, matter. I saw a stat, the 2008 class, only a third of the 2008 class actually made a significant impact in terms of, being drafted into the NFL or being a dominant player at their position inside their conference and things of that nature. I think it's very interesting to see that. But on the whole, what are your impressions with this class and where you see things heading for the Big Ten? Do you see us being able to compete on that level, at least in recruiting?
I think you brought up the key point earlier, Andy, was that it's a start. There's definitely, in terms of recruiting, a pronounced difference in levels, I guess, between consistent SEC recruiting and consistent Big Ten recruiting. That's not to say each conference doesn't have their own year or own a specific year, but generally speaking, looking at trends, there's a pronounced difference. And the SEC is certainly ahead, and that's a gap that's not going to be closed overnight. And I think that was a crucial point that you hit on early. I just want to go back to what you said, too, about the whole recruiting thing and how much stock you can take into it. I am not, and anyone who watches or listens to this program regularly knows, I'm not big into recruiting. I get why it's fun. I get why people enjoy it, and I certainly don't think there's any harm in giving people the information they desire and crave when it comes to recruits. But there are so many, even if, assuming recruiting and the rankings of certain recruits and teams recruiting classes was a perfect science, that's only one of several factors that makes a team great. There are so many things that you just can't quantify. You can't quantify a great coach. You just can't. There are numbers that tend to be higher for great coaches. Great offensive coordinators typically equal greater offensive output. Great defensive coordinators typically mean solid defensive numbers. Great head coaches typically rack up a good number of wins or consistently go to bowl games, whatever criteria you choose to use. But the fact is, let's go back to the fact that that's presuming that recruiting numbers and statistics aren't exact science. And while it's getting better, it's still not there, and it'll never be there. It's sports. These games, as the old cliche goes, the games aren't played on paper. These rosters, we don't just get a recruiting class and be like, oh, 3 years from now, we're just going to give this team a perfect 12-0 record and a national championship game appearance because they have the #1 recruiting class in the nation, and surely all these kids are going to bloom into something. We don't do that. I think we lose sight of the fact that these are 17 and 18, at best case scenario, year-old kids, that you just can't predict a lot of things. Guy might want to go work on his rap career, as we found out ended up not being completely the case, but was sort of the case. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, things happen. Certain kids get burned out and don't like the game. That's okay. They're human. I think sometimes we look at these kids as a number or as a star ranking and don't realize that these are kids who, a lot of which at this point have not even received a high school diploma yet. And this is a really big deal to put this all on one kid's shoulders. And if he doesn't develop, it doesn't make him less of a person or even less of an athlete in some cases. To point to a school like not be less of an athlete, look at Alabama. Top to bottom, there are a lot of stars on the recruits of those guys when they come in. Sometimes you get lost in the shuffle. Sometimes you come in as an athlete. They just don't find that right spot for you. Or you're a quarterback and all of a sudden you get your one. Look at James White at Wisconsin. Not the most highly touted kid, but a talented kid who really isn't going to get his first really big shot until his senior year because look at the running back situation at Wisconsin. He could have if Monty Ball's a year younger, James White gets lost in the shuffle and we never hear anything from him again. Or if Melvin Gordon doesn't go through an injury problem, maybe we're not even talking about James White, which is a scary fact because he's very talented. So I guess the moral of the story is that I think Big Ten recruiting is trending in the correct direction, but don't put too much stock or conference worth just in recruiting. There are so many odds and ends that just aren't accounted for with as good as these sites like 24/7 Sports have gotten, Scout.com have gotten at narrowing it down and really accurately predicting the capabilities of players. It will just never be possible to fully predict what a player is going to do, and you just can't take stock in a conference as a whole, in any sport really, just based on recruiting classes.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. A lot of it's coaching, a lot of it's, all the other stuff that comes along with it. So, but perfect segue, Nate, and perfect segue, Armand, into talking about rankings. We're talking about all of that. Perfect segue into the B1G Times top 25 players of the Big Ten. We got our preseason rankings going, and Wisconsin has made quite a dent in that, Nate. And just talking about it, we've got Ryan Groy at number 24. Jacob Pedersen comes in at number 20 on the list. James White, number 15. Jared Aberdarius, number 13 overall. And Chris Borland rounds out the Badger contingent at number 9 in our preseason rankings over at the b1gtime.com. Nate, why don't you let people know what's coming up here over the next 3 days as we wind things down?
Well, a lot of big stuff that you've come to expect. A lot of the same consistent coverage of just putting a nice bow on this thing and giving you 25 players to watch as we move forward here. Closer and closer to college football. It's almost here. It's almost here. We're getting there, and just something to chew on a little bit. I think it's going to be a nice segue into our team previews that we're going to be getting to in the near future, too. 12 teams in the Big Ten, 12 weeks. Every team is going to have their own dedicated week. And this is once we're done with the top 25 list that we have to polish off as well. But 25 teams and 25 players will be done coming up soon. 12 teams in 12 weeks, and lots of goodies coming up there. The B1G Time is going to have your football coverage pretty much on lockdown from here until camp starts and well beyond then. But a lot of fun stuff happening. I know it was fun compiling the list for you. It's been fun. I had a chance to contribute to the list this week too. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, head on over there. And if you think we got something wrong, let us know. We love the discussion part of it. That's part of why we do what we do. It's a two-way dialogue. And if you got your 2 cents, tweet at us, comment on the website. Let us know who you would have put where. We love that debate. Healthy sports debate, I think, in a world of polarizing views, is almost a lost art, but it's something that we definitely hope to promote over the B1G Time.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And coming up tomorrow through Friday, we're unveiling our top 3 players inside the Big Ten. Armand, your thoughts as you heard the names for Wisconsin on that list, your thoughts on the names that have made the list and maybe some names that you thought might make the list and didn't?
I mean, for me, the big standout is Melvin Gordon. I think when it's all said and done, he'll be a top 10 Big Ten player this season. I have very little doubt about that. I think that the coaches will give James White his due carries because he's a senior. He's been around. He's been a successful player the entire time his career, maybe except for a sophomore slump. But I think that he's not an every down back. I think Melvin Gordon will take the helm and just completely dominate. We're going to have a quarterback, probably Joel Stave. I'm going to stick with that pick. Tanner McAvoy will give him a run for his money. But nevertheless, our downfield game is going to be severely limited. Melvin Gordon is getting a ton of carries, and I would not be surprised at all if he breaks 1,500 yards, maybe 1,700 yards, double-digit touchdowns. Definitely, he'll be in the top 10. So that really surprised me, his lack of prominence on this list. I think Chris Borland is in a good position with the 3-4 defense. Rank 9 might be a little bit low. The guy's been an absolute beast his entire career. Max Bulla higher than Chris Borland. You got to give me a break here. Chris Borland has been a stellar player his entire career, and now he'll be in a system where he's not exactly an outside linebacker, which is where he was really tearing it up in the backfield his freshman year, but in a 3-4 system, even if as an inside linebacker, he'll still be rushing the quarterback on a regular basis, causing fumbles, picking off the ball, just causing havoc back there. And for anybody who's watched him play, I think he deserves a little bit higher than rank 9.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, and I will readily admit that I had him much higher. I had him in my top 4 of the players inside the Big Ten, and obviously I won't go any further than that in letting people know. But that's what happens when you've got voters, and some people rank certain people higher than anybody else, and they pick up more points. So I wouldn't disagree with you at all on Max Bulla. Melvin Gordon, I will say this: I think it's a name to watch. And we'll be talking about this, Nate, coming up, in the next few weeks here. But he is a name to watch for me too, and I agree with you. I think both of these guys, James White and Melvin Gordon, have every opportunity, I think, to go over 1,000 yards this season. I think it's the only hesitation I have with putting James White even higher than what he was, or in putting Gordon on this list, is the offensive line at Wisconsin. I need to see it before I believe it. Let's put it that way. I think this could be a situation like 2001 when you saw that offensive line kind of having trouble to gel until late in the season, and then suddenly the numbers started picking up. But until we see it on the field, I'm a little hesitant on that one. But like I said, Wednesday through Friday, 3, 2, and 1 will be revealed on our list, and I think you'll be surprised by the at least where 2 of these players end up. There are some names that I think will definitely surprise some people that they ended up where they did. And then lastly, you already mentioned this, Nate, team previews. Those will start next Monday. It will be Purdue week starting next Monday over at the b1gtime.com. The entire week We'll have offense, defensive previews, coaches breakdowns, schedule breakdowns, podcasts, all sorts of wonderful goodness, all about well, not really wonderful goodness, just stuff about about the Purdue Boilermakers who have a hate relationship with Wisconsin. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And make sure you check us out, b1gtime.com, theb1gtime.com, on Twitter at the b1gtime. Moving forward, though, let's talk more about Wisconsin. And Armand, I'm going to put this question to you, and we're going to start there. For me, this has to be, in recent memory, at least for me, and if not inside the last, I would say, almost 25 years, the best season on the whole, when you take a look at what's happened with the Wisconsin program, we have ever seen. Now, true, rowing and track and field have their NCAA or national championships, in the case of men's rowing, coming up this weekend. I understand that it's not completely done, but looking at it on the whole, it's hard for me to remember a better all-around season. For instance, the men's cross-country team, the football team, the hockey team, and indoor track team all won conference championships at some point or another. On the women's side, the softball team won a conference tournament. The softball team had the most wins in school history. Men's basketball team ended up as runner-ups, made it all the way to the Big Ten tournament final in a great game against Ohio State. And then you look at the NCAA side of things. Basketball, cross-country, hockey, swimming and diving had their first individual champion in 54 years. Finished the 5th highest in school history on the men's side with a 13th place finish. 7 track and field athletes are heading over to the nationals this weekend. And women's side, cross-country had one of their top finishes in their history. Rowing competes this weekend in, I think they're like 13th straight NCAA tournament. Softball, they ended up going to the NCAA tournament for the 5th time and winning their first ever games in the NCAA tournament. Track and field has, I think, 3 athletes going to the NCAA championships. For me, I can't picture a more balanced season. Football going to the Rose Bowl. And I want to pose it this way. There have been better seasons for football, but I don't think a lot of people right now or even 5 years from now will remember the fact that Wisconsin finished 7-5. I think they're going to remember they won the Big Ten championship game and they went to the Rose Bowl. What are your thoughts as far as where this ranks for you on your personal scale and maybe overall for you?
I mean, overall, it's definitely outstanding. There's no question or debate about that. I think on an emotional level, I would have to put 2005 a little bit higher. I think that there were less conference championships across the board, but I know that there were more national championships. I believe there was a track and field national championship for men. There definitely was men and women's hockey national championships, which was just, I mean, emotionally, I was on campus at that time, and that was just an absolute thrilling experience. The football season was outstanding. You had Brian Calhoun and John Stocco and Brandon Williams, and then you had Barry Alvarez's last season as head coach, and he took them to the Capital One Bowl where we beat Auburn.
Champ Sports Bowl.
Or Champ Sports. Oh, no, wait a minute. I'm confusing myself. That was the 2005 season, 2006 Capital One Bowl.
2005-06.
Thank you. Jeez. But that Auburn victory came out of nowhere. And I know I hate to be such a homer on football, but it makes such a difference to the school. I mean, you talk about how much exposure the school gets, how much money it gets for the victory at the bowl game compared to a smaller scale sport. So for those reasons, just because of the emotional aspect of those championships, I think that 2005 was a bigger year for me, although definitely less sports were relevant. Certainly softball, not nearly as relevant. Hockey was a totally different conference, but still won a national championship in both men and women, so who can say that that's not successful? Track and field, cross-country, maybe I think cross-country won national championships that year as well. So somebody can correct me because I'm mostly a football guy, but I just remember 2005 being an absolutely outstanding year, although it is tough to hold a candle to 2012, 2013.
And Nate, your thoughts on this? I mean, I think you're talking, the 05-06 season was the other candidate in my book. I mean, just the utter dominance of both hockey programs that season, and coupled with football being pretty decent, going to the Chance Sports Bowl, taking down I think it was Miami that season to win that one. But your thoughts overall on this season as we're kind of winding things down, and where it stands in your personal pantheon, if you will, of memorable seasons on the whole.
I think one of the most important things that needs to not be lost in the shuffle here is that even if you consider 2005 or 05, 06 as the most successful, the best Badger season ever, the fact that the conversation was even had again in such close succession is incredible. There can't be many schools who get to have this little chat like we're having right now, not even 10 years apart. That in and of itself is worth something. But man, 12-13 has been such a year for Wisconsin athletics as a whole. And 11-12 was a pretty good one too, a pretty good season too. That was one of the first Badger Power Hours I ever did with you. From the co-host perspective, we talked about where 11-12 ranked in the all-time stuff. We determined it wasn't the best ever, but I think a strong case can be made for 12-13 as one of the best seasons ever. Just so well-rounded. And yeah, I'm with Armand that football has to some extent, you hate to be a homer about it, but it has to some extent drive how you view it. I'm with you as well, though, that so few people are ever going to remember that this team finished 7-5, and that furthermore, Wisconsin-Nebraska in the Big Ten Championship game was on BTN the other day. Man, was that a throttling. I can't, in hindsight, when they cut the commercials out of that, it's unbelievable that they're cutting all of the fat off of the broadcast, and it still takes you almost an hour to get out of the third quarter, and they were up almost 40 at halftime. It's just, there were a lot of successes in that season, and yes, it's frustrating that Rose Bowl win has been so elusive, but man, this program, it starts with football, but this athletics program is so healthy. And in my opinion, if you made me cast a ballot right now, I think that 12-13 would get my vote for the best Wisconsin season ever as a whole in terms of the athletic department.
And I think, kind of doing a little background research in terms of trying to aggregate all the numbers and get everything correct, because I am going to do an article about this, but looking at the numbers, third most Big Ten or conference champions in history, and then third most NCAA appearances in history, and that doesn't even include individual titles and things of that nature. So going to be very interesting to see what happens there. Once this all shakes down after this next weekend, could add a few more on, and if they add 2 or 3 more onto that, you're looking at the greatest NCAA tournament, or NCAA or football or however, basically all of their national individual sports national recognition that can happen, ranking right up there. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I'll tell you this much, 13-14 sure has a hell of an act to follow. Armand, before we kind of wrap things up here, we've got about 6 minutes or so left. I want to get your closing thoughts on the season and what you're looking forward to covering as we move forward. And what were your big headlines outside of the Brett Bielema, Gary Anderson moments?
It's just been a busy spring. For me, the biggest headline as far as football is concerned, and this is such a silly, stupid thing, is the state of Georgia. I think a lot about recruiting during the spring evaluation period, and so rarely in the past, 10 years that I've been following Wisconsin football have we even offered a player in Georgia, let alone focused on it. There are more offers out in that state than any other, and there's more talent there than I think a lot of other people realize. Normally we've gone after Florida, occasionally gone after Texas, depending on what assistant coaches are around. Obviously, the Midwestern states, Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. But Georgia's really the takeaway for me because I think it reflects a lot about the personality of the coaches, the mentality, that aggressive nature we were talking about earlier. They're just going right into the South. They're putting the coaches in there, most of which don't have any connections in the state of Georgia at all, and they're saying to them, hey, let's see if we can get a couple kids to start building those bridges. And then years down the road, we know that these kids don't all go to the University of Georgia. They're not all Bulldogs. other states and schools come in and just pick them off. So why can't we join that party? And that seems like maybe such a silly thing to people, but I think it really represents a lot about the coach's mentality, and that was my big takeaway. I just can't wait for a few weeks for fall camp to start. Tanner McAvoy to get on campus here, start hearing reports about his performance. Hopefully everybody can stay injury-free. And also Rob Wheelwright. We haven't even talked about him in this whole wide receiver conversation. Big-time, big-bodied, Nick Toon-esque wide receiver, at least physically. So I want to see what he can do. And, it's just a few more weeks to go. And in the meantime, I'm just going to watch Game of Thrones. That's going to get me by, although that ends pretty quickly. So I don't know. I'm just going to be twiddling my thumbs, I guess, for a few weeks.
Well, let's not forget this is Arthur Goldberg to Badger football. That's right, folks. We've got our daily countdown to the start of Badger football, doing different jersey numbers. So we're on number 95 days, and it's Arthur Goldberg to Badger football. I don't know if you guys got a chance to see this yesterday or not, but Bo Allen happened to tweet back at us after we said it was Bo Allen to Badger football that apparently he didn't know that he was a measure of time. So he's putting that on his resume that he is a measure of time.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous.
But Nate, I want to also get your last, headline of the 2012-13, calendar year or academic year, as it were, and what were your big takeaways? I know obviously hockey had to play a big part in that for you as well.
It's something I will never. Especially having had the privilege to personally cover this team. It's something that I will tell people for the rest of my life, that what these young men did for Wisconsin hockey, it didn't end up with a Cinderella ending that everyone would have loved it to have had, but what these young men did was incredible. Given the circumstances, given suspensions, given injuries, given a coaching change a couple weeks in, just flat out not winning games. That turnaround was incredible. And that turnaround saved Mike E's job. Anything that happens, and I firmly believe that, anything that happens from here on out in Mike E's tenure, whatever's left of it at Wisconsin, is only credit to his team he had this year. Because if those boys are going to turn it around, we're not talking Mike Eves as your hockey coach in 2013-14. But on a more general sense, my biggest takeaways, I said this at the end of the year last year, and I feel bad for repeating myself, but the fact that I'm even able to do so, I think speaks volumes about the University of Wisconsin and the pride it takes in its athletics program. This athletics department and the programs within it are in the healthiest state for the most part that any of them have ever been. And as a whole, I'd say it is the healthiest it's ever been. Take pride in that as a Wisconsin fan, as someone who follows it, as someone who writes about it. It's incredible because the type of success that Badger fans have been able to enjoy from last year to this year, heck, since the 90s, you could argue, is unprecedented. And the fact that they took a very high bar set in 11-12 and topped it in 12 and 13, it's going to be a tough act to follow this upcoming year. But, man, just soak it all in as a Badger fan. I guess that's my biggest takeaway, that there are some incredible things happening down in Madison, and there's no reason to believe that any of them are going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And obviously, generally we would like to leave on that note, but there is one topic we have yet to hit on, and I wanted to set this aside from, as the B1G time turns and all of that stuff, because I think it's such a vital topic to not only the Big Ten, but to what could happen to Wisconsin 2014 and 15 with their with the football team playing Rutgers. And that's the situation going on at Rutgers. For those of you who haven't been following, head over to the b1gtime.com. We've kind of been on the Fire Barchi bandwagon, who's the Robert Barchi, who is the president over at Rutgers, basically since March, since he came out with that awful press conference. And Armand, I wanted to get your thoughts on this situation. For somebody who follows the Big Ten, it's been 3 years of scandals and controversy, and we don't need any more of it. And Rutgers keeps piling on, and they're not even an official member of the Big Ten yet. Your thoughts on the situation? Because if anybody wants to see mine, they can just go over to the b1gtime.com and see them. Plain as day.
Rutgers, to me, is a clear example of a group of people that are trying to put a plane together in midair instead of just assembling onto the ground, taking the time to make sure that everything's working correctly, and then taking off. The problem is that they're joining the Big Ten. God knows how much work there is to do on the back end to make that happen seamlessly, so they desperately need to have an effective athletic director in place. But you can't allow, as the president and as the directorship of the school, you can't allow a vetting process to be done half-assed and end up in a situation like they are right now, where there's yet another scandal. I mean, I don't think that this scandal is of the same magnitude as the Rice situation, but it's just another stain on the program. It just reflects really badly. It's like if you're somebody who is caught stealing and then, the next thing you know, you accidentally walk out of the store with something in your bag that you didn't pay for. I mean, it looks like stealing. It looks like you're intentionally trying to take it, even though it may be a genuine mistake. It's just carelessness, and it doesn't reflect well in the program. I'm getting a little bit sick and tired of hearing about Rutgers. I mean, I just know that as soon as they join the conference, teams are going to go into Piscataway and just steamroll them, including us. So, bring it on. Hopefully they get their shit together, pardon my language, but that's basically just how I feel whenever I see these headlines at this point.
Yeah, and I think, Nate, one of the points that I made is how the Board of Regents allowed Barchi to even direct this search when he was so incompetent in the Pernetti situation to begin with. And I think one of the interesting things that came out this weekend is the fact that they hired this, headhunting, recruiting firm, whatever you want to call them. They hired this firm, and they submitted a list of, I think, 6 or 7 candidates that they wanted them to take a look at, and Herman's name was off this list because they had done the research into this and had left her off because of her past. And somehow she still ended up a finalist. For me, that's just arrogance on Rutgers' part, and somebody needs to step in, whether it's Governor Christie, whether it's the legislator that has control there, and put a foot down and say enough is enough. We're going to make some changes here, and you don't have to be squeaky clean, and that's the other part for me, Nate. A guy like Sean Frazier from Wisconsin, he's not squeaky clean because of the whole Kadima situation and what happened. But like I wrote, there's a difference between Kadima and what Herman did. Kadima's situation was handled beautifully. They did all the they did all the right things after the fact. They didn't hide anything. Frazier was involved in making sure that nothing was hidden, that it was wide open to the public, that it was taken to a university level. But it's the exact opposite at Rutgers, and it's the exact opposite of what Herman did in her situations. There's now multiples of these. And for me, that it just reeks of inept leadership, and something's got to change because, let's face it, the Big Ten has had enough of these scandals, and at some point something's got to change for them to become a seamless member of the Big Ten in just a year's time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that, Andy. There's no doubt in my mind that some things, plural, need to change at Rutgers. I don't mean to oversimplify things, but it's almost as though in this search, Rutgers just cast the dice and said, what are the odds we hire someone like this again? And then didn't really do their homework, like you said, as the headhunting firm, to take the nice term that you coined there. Instead of taking their word for it, instead of doing the research as the firm did, they just left it up to chance that, yeah, what are the odds that we hire someone who got in trouble for something that's not exactly the same thing we hired our coach for, our men's basketball coach for, is remarkably close, or who has a history that really, as Armand was saying, doesn't reflect kindly upon any sense of image restoration that you can even have at this point in the game. That's the thing. Rutgers' first chance. This is what bothers me the most about it. Rutgers' first shot at image restoration was hiring the new AD. What did they do with their first chance to restore their image? Dug the hole even deeper, put down the shovel. And I don't know who has, like you said, I don't know who has to put down the shovel for them, because clearly they're not ready to do it, whether intentionally or unintentionally, whether through negligence or whether through calculated decision. That's not my place to say. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, the shovel is still firmly in the grip of too many people who who don't understand the implications or the necessity to turn this program around. And I think that's the most disturbing thing of anything, is that you had a half-assed apology. Pardon my language, but you referred to it less than satisfactory, no doubt about it. And how do they follow that up with someone who might be just as much a scum as the guy they just fired? And that, that's just something that even if she's changed her ways, you have to be cognizant of her past, and Rutgers was definitely not. And that it's just a scary situation. That what needs to be kept in mind is that the situation that you're exposing student athletes to,
Mm-hmm.
and that needs to take precedence, and so far it hasn't.
Yeah, and just to wrap things up here, I think, to put it this way, it's everybody gets second chances in life. I'm a living example of this, and everybody should. But second chances don't mean that you get your dream job. Second chances don't mean that you're qualified for every position that you're up for. Second chances could be that, you go from the associate AD at Louisville to the AD at a D2 school and improve yourself and then move up the rankings. Whatever it may be, second chances aren't a guarantee in life, and it just seems weird that this is happening. So hopefully something changes in the next few weeks here, because otherwise they're just going to be a joke coming into the Big Ten. And let's face it, outside of their football program being halfway decent, the rest of that program is not exactly what I would call awesome. So they need to really think about what their image is like. But obviously we've talked a lot about that. We've talked a lot about the Badgers in 2012, 2013. Moving forward here in the summer, we're going to try to do Badgers Power Hour every other week or so. Look for a ton of guests this summer as we kind of do things up here. And hopefully we can bring you some recruiting interviews and some of these other things here. But for Armand and for Nate, I say thank you so much for joining us here on Badgers Power Hour. And on that note, on Wisconsin.